there's so many things that it's not just impulsivity, it's like via hyperfixations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure I built a house as an ADHD hyperfixation.
Did you?
That's the only reason I'm a homeowner.
Welcome everyone to another wonderful podcast in another wonderful day, because it's grey outside, typical London weather. But regardless, it's going to be a stunning podcast because I'm with the lovely lady called Sara Lohse. Lohse. I said that.
You nailed it.
I nailed it. Of course I did, without a doubt. And you see, he's such a nice person. I know it's going to be a great podcast. Now, as always, listeners, I do not have a clue what this lady is all about, even though she gave me a snoot. It came out of the bag just at the end there before we came on. But I don't know her background. I don't know what she exactly does, and so on and so forth. So we're just going to have a wonderful conversation in a wonderful way. And I will let her, as usual with everybody that comes on, tell us what she does to help clients in a positive way, in a successful way, and then we'll go with the flow. Hello, Sara. Please.
Hi.
Hiya.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I also don't really know what I do, so we have something in common already.
Oh, dear.
I work in podcasting, so I have a podcast production house and I specialize in branded podcasts. So I launch podcasts for businesses and entrepreneurs as strategic marketing tools. And I also work one-on-one with people who want to be thought leaders and build a personal brand. And I work with them on how to tell their story. I am a kind of professional storytelling coach, and I help people figure out what their story is, how they can tell it, and how they can use it to grow their business.
Now, you know what? I like this one for today. You know why? Because then I can, on the roundabout, pick her brains without her charging me for getting the information. So I think we're going to do that today. What do you think, listeners?
Perfect.
Yeah, totally. Let's see if she can help us. But more importantly, Sara, on the serious note, what was it that made you want to help people with their podcasts? Why did that come about?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs in the background. It's garbage day, so they're going crazy. But I got into podcasting back in 2019, 2020, when I kind of inherited a podcast when I became director of marketing for a company that had one. And it's actually the storytelling piece that I fell in love with. I was accidentally booked as a guest on one of the biggest finance podcasts to tell a story about an embarrassing tattoo I got on vacation once, which has nothing to do with finance or anything I was doing in my professional life.
Wow.
But the host of that show he just wanted the story on his show because he thought it was funny, he thought it was a cool hook. But he had to interview me in a way that drew value out of that story, so he had something to offer his audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I, on the fly, just learned how to tell a good story. And I became a little bit obsessed. I started studying storytelling, and my book on how to tell a story as a thought leader came out earlier this year, just won its second award. And I just really went all in on the storytelling piece, and podcasting is just the best media for that. It's all about telling stories and building authentic connections. So it just all kind of fell into place.
Now, I wonder, when you didn't think that you was going to hit a podcast and be asked to tell your story, and then you knew at the last moment and you thought, what did you think?
What do you mean?
Was you nervous? Was you
to tell that story?
Yeah.
It was completely on accident. I was at a podcast conference, and the podcast I'm talking about is called Stacking Benjamins. It's a really popular finance podcast here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to get the host of the show I was producing booked as a guest because it was a finance show. I was working for a financial planner.
Mm-hmm.
And I stalked Joe, the host, for 3 days, just trying to get him alone because he's a celebrity in that space and it's impossible to talk to him.
Uh-huh.
And when I finally did, I pitched him the host, and he's an expert in this, this, and this, and he has been doing this for 20 years. And I had no idea what I was doing, no idea how to pitch for a podcast. I was just spurting out facts. And he just looks at me, I don't need an expert. I want someone with a cool story. And the only thing I could think to say was, do you want to hear about the time I got a tattoo of a penis while I was in Ireland? And he did.
What?
So I accidentally got booked on the show instead of who I was hoping to get booked.
So secretly, was you hoping by saying that to him, he would just back off and not have you on the podcast, or
I had no goal. I think I had a stroke, which I think that's what happened. And it just kind of came out.
Okay.
And so he was like, okay, well, that's a story I want on the show. So I got myself booked, and I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been on a podcast before. I'd only produced. I'd only been on the back end. But he walked me through telling the story in a way that actually made it a story worth telling. And the biggest lesson I found was that if that story can be valuable, then everybody has to have stories worth telling. They just haven't figured it out yet.
Totally. And I totally resonate with that, because the way I get people on the podcast, as you already know, I don't know who comes onto this podcast, and people are shocked when I get whoever on the podcast and they go, but you don't know anything about me. It's irrelevant, because the thing is, as long as you have that conversation, and as long as you get that essence of what's needed in that conversation, that's all that matters. And that is a skill in itself, having the conversation. A lot of people can spurt off questions, right? And that's usually what you get in podcasts, is that they have these questions, templates they work from, but then you're in a position you have to be very specific who you get on there. But if you have the skill set to have that conversation, which is what that gentleman had, he had the skill set to have the conversation. And you must have been wowed at the time, because you thought, my God, this is opposite of what I'm supposed to be talking about. And still, he made it show value. So it was ridiculous, but it was an amazing experience. And it's how I learned how to tell stories. So then when my book came out, I told that whole story within the book, and the host of the show is actually the gentleman who wrote the foreword for my book. Wow. So everything worked in tandem, just at the right time and the right place within your life. And it wasn't planned. It was something that you actually fell into. But let's look at that story. For you to have the the gumption to be able to go from one situation to the other, because you seem to fall into a situation and you just go with it. You just go, right, I'm just going to do this. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's no backing out at some point, so you just got to make the best of it.
Right, and you're quite happy doing that. So you tend to go through life in a way that, okay, let's see what happens, and then you go on to the next stage. Is that how you do things?
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, I know. I get that. I feel that vibe, because most people, the way you told that story, most people would not have come up with something like that. That, to me, is someone that knows how to think on their feet and think, hey, it is what it is. I'm just going to say it as it is. It's either going to go in one way or the other direction. And that's where it seems you come from. And so it seems like you live life from that point of view. Now, saying that, for you to be in that position, what made you be that way? You weren't born like that. You weren't a situation where you was like that all your life, but something happened within your life that made you think, you know what, life is life, and I'm just going to go with the flow and just do whatever, and it either works or it either doesn't. Does that make sense, or am I going in the wrong direction and I'm completely wrong?
No, that's interesting. It's probably not even something I've ever thought about. But I think some of it probably, I mean, this is a show about neurodiversity, and I am all types of neurospicy. So part of it's probably connected to just me having such high levels of anxiety, because at some points I just have to do whatever it is that's happening, because if I overthink it too much, I'll get really anxious about it and I won't do anything at all.
So
So,
that's where the baby steps come into place. When something
yeah.
happens, you don't let it just fester for too long because you know what you're like. You just go for the
Yeah.
flow.
If I think about it, I won't do it anymore. So it's just a matter of like, I just gotta just do it on the spot.
Wow, that's amazing. Right. So where did this anxiety come from? Was it a situation you've always had it all your life since you can remember? Or did something happen within your life for you to be quite anxious?
It's a combination. It's interesting when you get diagnosed with things like mental health issues later in life, because I didn't get my diagnosis for anything until I was in my 20s. You kind of get to look back and connect a lot of dots. And so I got my diagnosis for anxiety and depression in my early 20s and ADHD in my late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I can look back, and it's even like now, so I'm 29 now. I've known about my ADHD diagnosis for about 1.5 to 2 years. And I've been able to look back and see all of these like personality quirks that I've had my whole life that have annoyed me, that I've realized are symptoms.
Uh-huh.
But even more recently, I've been realizing the things that I did as a kid that were anxiety, that I didn't realize were anxiety. And it's really kind of interesting to see the things that, it's usually the things that I didn't like about myself the most,
Mm-hmm.
that it was really comforting to know are symptoms and not personality flaws. So it's definitely things that I had my whole life, but there have been things that have made things worse. I mean, as I'm a woman, so I'm one of the many women who have experienced sexual assault and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't help. That definitely added to it for sure.
Right.
So it's kind of a combination, like nature and nurture, I would say, because it has been there my whole life, but it's gotten worse over time.
Okay, so you say about the quirks. What quirks were they? Just list us about 3 of them. How quirky are you?
Very. But the things for my that are connected to mental health. Well, for the anxiety, I remember when I was even in kindergarten, or like first grade, I would be sitting in class just like unable to do anything, and I would just get up and go to the nurse because I didn't know what else to do. And looking back, I think those were like my first ever anxiety attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And it was happening really often when I was younger. So I think that was kind of when my anxiety started to show, and I just didn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
But then things like ADHD, I always referred to my ADHD as a little man living in my head.
Really?
Yeah, I always knew there was a little guy in my head. This is gonna make me sound completely insane,
Okay.
but he like would take over my focus, so I had to distract him.
Uh-huh.
So I would, even when I was in high school or elementary school and I'm doing homework, I'd have the TV on.
Uh-huh.
And my mom would always get mad because like, you need to focus on your homework. I'm like, I'm focusing. The TV is to distract the guy in my head who won't let me focus.
Uh-huh.
And now as an adult with a diagnosis, I'm like, oh no, that's just ADHD. I just can't, like, physically couldn't focus unless I had something like blocking out the quiet almost.
I get that. So when did this, at what age did this method, this coping mechanism evolve when it comes to that man in your head?
It was definitely in grade school, but it never really went away. My first job out of college, if I was working on something that was kind of mindless, and I worked in marketing at the time, like at an ad agency, anything I was doing that was mindless, I'd have the show Friends playing on Netflix on my phone. And the president of the company would come up behind me like, are you watching TV? Like, you're supposed to be working. I'm like, no, I'm working. The little man in my head is watching TV. So it's been going on as long as I can remember.
What did he say to that when you said that to him?
She just kind of looked at me and walked away. I think she had given up on me already at that point. But I mean, even things as like I've always been clumsy, and spatial awareness is part of it. And it's interesting though, because the reason I wasn't diagnosed earlier than I was is I was actually diagnosed like borderline narcoleptic. Because I don't know if it's just the ADHD or the way that it like interacts with like anxiety and depression. For me, it's I can't stay awake, and I would be like, I would feel sick if I didn't go take a nap by like noon every day. So I actually I went to a narcoleptologist and did sleep tests, and they thought I had like a low level of narcolepsy. But I can remember every day after school, I would have to take a nap or I wouldn't be able to function. So that's been going on my whole life too. It's really weird to see like the connections and things that like I just never noticed.
I tell you what, the man in your head is quite powerful. It's not so worrying for me, because what happened? You found a physical, mental mechanism to be able to help you. So for instance, instead of saying, I'm not focusing, that's quite floaty to try to handle that and try to maintain that situation. But when you have some kind of, want for a better word, a physical entity that you can apply to, that man in my head, then it's a situation you can move that physical entity from A to Z. And I think it's much easier for especially a child to visualize, move it, then move on, rather than this floaty thing that's happening. What is that? What is happening? And I quite find that quite fascinating. And I suppose you still use it. You may not call it the man in your head, but you.
Oh no, I still call him that.
Okay, there you go. And why change that? If
it works, it works.
Exactly.
He's been with me my whole life. I can't abandon him now.
Totally, exactly. And your boyfriend probably thinks you're a bit nutty, you know. I'm sure. But if it works,
couple personalities, that's fine. Just pick your favorite, and hopefully that one shows up the most.
It makes you far more interesting, trust me.
Normal is boring.
Yeah, is it not? Normal is boring, without a doubt. There's no two ways about that. But on a serious note, that's a really interesting. That's the first time I've heard someone actually turn it into a physical entity, so it's easier, like Play-Doh, like clay, to be able to use and then move on and then control your life in such a positive way. And it's amazing that you're still using it too. So what other spicy things, what other wacky things did you do when you was younger with hindsight? Now you've got hindsight. Obviously, you wouldn't have known at the time, but now you're powered with hindsight. What strange, weird, and wonderful things that are associated with your ADHD?
Definitely masking. Like, as long as I can remember, I've kind of tried to be whoever I think someone wants me to be. And I mean, that goes back to fun childhood traumas, of course, but I think it also has that connection to the ADHD. And even like body doubling. Before I ever knew ADHD and that body doubling was a thing. Like if I was in college and I had to pack up my dorm, I couldn't do it. I had to have a friend come and just sit in the dorm with me to get it done. And now I'm 29 and I own a home. And if I'm going to clean my house, my neighbor has to come and sit on my couch. It's things that now I know what it is now, but I didn't know what it was back then, but I still knew I needed it.
Okay, let's talk about more of that body doubling, because I've had people come on here and I've heard about many things, but body doubling is not a typical thing. So let's go.
Really?
But yeah, just explain it to me, to a layman, for other people that may not know about body doubling. So let's break it down in layman terms. What is body doubling?
Yeah, body doubling, I don't really know the science behind it or the psychology behind it too much, but basically you need someone else in your space in order to be productive. It's like them being there forces you to focus on what you have to do. Okay. So if I'm gonna, I can spend 5 hours just sitting on the couch being mad at myself for not getting up and cleaning because I just executive dysfunction, I can't get myself to do it. But if I have Heather come over and just bring her computer and work from my house, or bring a book and just sit on my couch and read, her being there makes me productive.
I see.
I think it might have something to do with like, I don't want to be judged for being unproductive, maybe.
Mhm.
Or it's also, I don't know if this has been talked about, but when if you have someone call you and say they're going to be over in 30 minutes, you clean your entire house versus you just spent like 2 weeks not being able to clean a single thing.
Yeah, I suppose so, because it helps you to be accountable. So that's basically finding someone that helps you to be accountable without asking them for you to be accountable. In your case, just having them there is enough for you to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
So and if it works, again, it works. But
and my neighbor that I have do it, she lives in the house behind me, and we've gotten really close to the point that we actually put a gate in our back fence so she can just walk straight through to my yard. And she, like, I'll just text her like, hey, I need a body double, and she knows she has ADHD as well, so it's not even like I have to make up some excuse. It's just like, hey, I gotta clean, I need a body double, come sit on my couch, and she'll just grab a book.
And at the same time, does she need a body double, or is this something that's very rare to you that you know of, or is this typical in your circle of friends who are ADHD or autistic?
She hasn't needed it. She's a full-grown adult versus I'm still kind of an adult with training wheels. So I guess she's probably figured out.
You're a full-grown adult. You're just different. That's all it is. It doesn't make you not being an adult because you need a body double. Come on.
Adult with training wheels. But she's managed to figure out ways to deal with it probably better than I have as of yet. So I haven't had to body double for her.
Okay.
I would if she needed me to. I'm happy to do it.
Oh, no, I know you are. You like to give as well as take. So let's just see where that body double comes from. Okay. Go as far as you can, which the first time that you needed an undercover body double. Because when you was younger, you didn't go, I need a body double. You did an undercover one, right? You made sure someone was in your space. So go back as far as you can when you first can remember you had to have a body double, and then we'll go with it.
Honestly, I think it was college. The one, like, as far as I can remember, it was I'm leaving for break and I need to pack, or it's the end of the term and I need to like pack up my dorm to move out, and I couldn't do it. And my friend Kaylee would either have to come to my room or be on FaceTime, and just that alone would help me, and I would be able to get everything done.
Okay, so this happened quite late in your childhood, to be honest. So what triggered it? Because something did. Something happened close to that stage where you felt that you had to have that. Whether that was something you felt insecure because you needed someone in your space, or you didn't feel confident enough and you needed someone in your space, but something happened just previously then that made you have a think, that made you think, I need someone in my space.
I think it was more, so I can remember as my entire life having just the executive dysfunction piece of it, and my room was always a mess. I couldn't clean. If I was asked to do any type of chores, it was like the worst thing you can ask me to do. I think it was just more of a coincidence that when I was in college that I just noticed like, oh, I can do this better if someone's here. And I never knew what it was. And we would just joke about it. Like I basically needed a babysitter kind of. And I didn't realize what it was until I got my diagnosis.
There's no coincidences in life. They don't exist. There's always a trigger for something in life. So I'm just thinking, was it a situation that you left? And then it's like, I was used to my space. Now everybody else can see my space and I don't feel cool about it. And then maybe that's when that happened, because you may feel ashamed about your space, and that's a way of triggering to get you involved. But me personally, there are no coincidences. There's a reason for everything. I'm a Buddhist, and I'm a lifelong follower of philosophers too. So, but that's a personal thing. It's not to say that everyone else should think the same way, but I don't believe in coincidence. So there's always a trigger from one to the next. As you already know, you have to do something, right? Otherwise, you'll talk yourself out of it. But there's always a trigger that makes you successful or not to the next stage.
Yeah, I think it was more of just I noticed it working. Like if I would just have a friend there and then I'm like, whoa, I was productive. This that must be the secret. And then just kind of run with it. I think that's probably closer.
Okay, so as you was getting older, you've seen the secret sauce in more ways than one. In the situation number one is that, anxiety. You had your anxiety, but you noticed, if you give yourself a certain time frame, you're cool. Leave it any longer, then you're in problems. That's number one. Then you had the.
Which is why I'm very impulsive.
Yeah, but is that
incredibly?
Is that a good or bad way? I mean, impulsiveness. Okay, let's give us a negative impulsive situation that was no, never again.
I don't recommend anyone's first date with someone they met online be getting into a rental car with them and taking a road trip to Ohio.
Oh, yes. You're totally right.
Yeah, that's not something I recommend. Don't do that. I did that.
Oh, that was dangerous. And I suppose that was where you got yourself in a problem, in an issue.
I mean, it worked out okay, but when I got back, I was like, oh, I totally could have been murdered.
Yeah.
It was kind of hindsight 2020. He didn't kill me and everything was fine. It was actually a great time.
I get that. But the great thing is that when that situation was over and dusted, you actually saw the danger in it. And then you obviously saw the impulsiveness in you. And at that point, did you make some changes within your impulse?
Well, I haven't done that again.
Okay.
But there's so many things that it's not just impulsivity. It's like the hyperfixations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure I built a house as an ADHD hyperfixation.
Did you?
That's the only reason I'm a homeowner. I had no intention of ever buying a house, and I saw something that was just like, build a house. We have lots available. And I was like, okay. And by 2 days later, I was putting my name down and now I have a house.
And that was due to your ADHD, I take it?
It seemed very hyperfixation because once I was done, I was like, wait, I actually did that. And I still don't know if it was a good decision or not. Give me a few more years and I'll let you know.
So I take it the reason why you're on the fence whether that's a good decision or not is because you're a bit of a flyer. You like to be independent. You like to move around. You don't like to stay in one place.
I had never lived anywhere for more than a year since I moved out of my childhood home.
Yeah, I thought so. And that's why you're still thinking, is this right? Because I don't really want to root. I want to have that flexibility.
Yeah. And so I never really saw myself actually putting down roots. And now I have an entire house and I have 2 dogs, and that was not on my bingo card, but here we are. But at the same time, I have everything you need to do so many hobbies that I've never touched. If anyone needs a crocheting kit or hand embroidery or clay jewelry making, I have everything. They've never been open, but I decided one day those will be my hobbies, and they weren't.
And then if it happens, so they're still catching dust on the side, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hear you.
Yep, it's all those it's the ADHD hobbies that you never actually do.
Well, you never know. You may get to them by the time you're 60. At least they'll be antiques.
See, the hobbies I choose, they would be more age appropriate when I'm 60, because it's crocheting and knitting and embroidery.
Well, there you go. There you go.
I'm just waiting. It was an investment because with inflation, yarn will be more expensive later.
Well, put it this way: your crystal ball worked, right? You looked in the crystal ball and you knew what was coming in the future. So, but again, being serious. of course, part of the situation that you have with the ADHD is it's one of the issues you have where you can be impulsive, and you can just pick up something, think you're going to roll with it, it stays on the side. Another project, please. Another project, please. Another project, please. So, saying that with the projects, with relationships, do you have the same, I shouldn't say attitude, but the same way about you when it comes to relationships? Is it easy enough with your ADHD to be focused, or do you tend to flitter and not stay in one situation with your relationship? And the reason why I say that is because you like to be a free bird and you like to move around, but also at the same time, you don't stick to one project. So does that affect your relationships?
That's an interesting question. So I had never been in anything very long. I think the longest relationship I'd ever been in was probably like 8 months. But I think a lot of that is actually, so when I was in my early 20s, I was in a really bad relationship, and it was traumatic. I thought it was going to kill me. So I had felt very dependent and kind of built my whole life around this person. And when that fell apart, I didn't ever want to feel like that again. I didn't want to feel like my existence relied on anybody else. So I purposely stayed single until I knew that I would never need anybody. So I moved across the country. I ended up launching a company. I built my house. I did everything on my own that I could think to do, so that I would be in a position to not need anyone. So I think maybe my relationships are more due to that than
the condition. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's see if that's the case. Before you had that toxic relationship, what were your relationships like? Of course, you was much younger, so they're not too serious, but what were your relationships like?
Not great. I actually recently became friends with one of my like college exes again, and we've like talked through the like BS of what I was back then. And I also can look back now and realize it was also pre-diagnosis for anxiety and depression. So I was just in a bad mental state without realizing it, and was kind of, I think Taylor Tomlinson, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a comedian that talks a lot about mental health, and she calls her meds her water wings. And without them, she uses other people to keep her afloat, even though she's kind of drowning them and not noticing. And that's kind of where I was at. So I don't know. I think I guess none of them can exist in a vacuum. So everything is some kind of combination of ADHD, anxiety, depression, because I have the fun trifecta. And it's hard to always know which one is causing what.
I get that, because part of your journey in life, things do gather and add to that. And unfortunately, especially with your depression, with the ADHD, that's made things quite, how can I say, challenging for you. It hasn't been easy for you at all. But at the same time, by going through those challenges, you've found out what you really want in life. You found out your strength, because what you did, you became single for some time so you can gain your strength and your independence. So by going through those really difficult times with the ex and whatever else before that, it's brought you to the point of view of your strength right now. So you're a very independent person, you can rely on yourself. And when you're ready to have that more committed relationship, it's not a situation where you feel like you've got to rely on a man, woman, whatever that case may be. And that just makes you a happier, stronger person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I needed to, that's actually like my whole story kind of comes back to that, the bad tattoo I got in Ireland. that whole trip was because I had a trip to Greece booked to get engaged to that boyfriend. And when it fell apart, I had already had the time off. I'd already had the savings. And I just decided I need to know if I can do things by myself. So I took myself on a solo trip to Ireland instead of the trip that I had planned. And it was just a week of being completely on my own in a country that I knew nobody and didn't know where I was. I was getting lost without phone service and just kind of finding myself. And it changed my life years later when the story came up, because I had never thought of it the way that I think of it now. Because not only like when he was interviewing me and having me tell that story, it wasn't just his audience that was able to like find value in it, but I found it. And it taught me lessons that I'd already lived through but didn't appreciate at the time.
That took a lot of courage for you to, first of all, I take it was you living in America at the time before that?
Yeah, at the time I lived in Maryland. I've since moved to Texas. And that trip was 1 week in Ireland.
So that took a lot of courage for you to especially come from a situation where you're used to having someone 24/7 and you had to, from your point of view at the time, rely on them. And then you had to take yourself, not in the next county, but over the pond, literally, in Ireland. And may I say, I know Ireland's beautiful, but it's cold. It's cold.
Yeah, it was like unseasonably warm when I went, which was nice.
So
and
you brought luck. You brought luck.
Yeah, I went, it was like September too. And I think they were just on the end of a drought. So it wasn't even that rainy. So I lucked out a little bit. Not that droughts are lucky, but I did get some really nice weather. But it was beautiful. But I chose it also because I thought there would be no language barrier. I was wrong. Drunk Irish people do not speak English. And I am like 50% Irish, so I'm allowed to say that. But it was like, everyone is so nice there. And I wanted to go somewhere where I would feel safe being by myself. And so I had to figure out where I could go alone as a 21-year-old woman. And Ireland just kind of stuck out. So I basically felt safe the whole time I was there, which was really nice, especially being by myself.
I'm really glad for you. That's perfect. So this is a great journey you've had in your life. I mean, we haven't had much time to talk about everything within your life, because this is a snippet of what's going on. But you've shown us that you've had a huge amount of anxiety and issues when it comes to that. A lot's gone on in your life when it comes to relationships, and you've had to navigate that. And it hasn't been easy trying to navigate ADHD when you didn't know you had ADHD. So that was one big issue. And with depression, mixed with depression, that's a really difficult, confusing state, especially when you don't know what you're dealing with. So that must have been really difficult for you with your relationships. Really difficult for you, as in you having a relationship with yourself more so. Yeah. That was very difficult and very confusing.
Yeah, there's been a lot of having to forgive myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
because you have a relationship with yourself, right? So you've got to have that relationship to forgive yourself too, just like you would forgive someone else. You've got to forgive yourself.
Yeah, it's like all of the, like I said, the traits and the things that I can remember as a kid that I hated about myself, now I can realize weren't my fault and kind of forgive myself for that, which has been really interesting.
And how difficult was that to do, to be able to forgive yourself? Did you have to go through a long, arduous process, or what happened for you to get to the stage of forgiving yourself? Because forgiveness is really very, very powerful for a person, not just you, but for anybody to be able to move on to the next stage, for the healing process to take. So how long, when did you realize you had to forgive yourself? That's number one. When you got to the stage where, I've got to forgive myself. And how long did it take you to really forgive yourself?
I'll let you know when I'm done. I feel like that's going to be kind of a lifelong journey. But the interesting thing is I mean, like I said, I was misdiagnosed, and I was misdiagnosed my entire life. My mother, when I was growing up, she always called me a hypochondriac because I knew things were wrong with me, but I didn't know what. And I was so desperate to like have a diagnosis, to just have something to hold on to, that anything I heard of that even was remotely close, like I was my own WebMD. Anything that was remotely close, I'd be like, yeah, that's it. I have that. And like I was always accused of just being dramatic and making things up and just wanting attention and being a hypochondriac. But looking back, it was just that desperation of I know something is wrong and I don't know what it is. And then as an adult, I mean, I had like acid reflux my entire, like my whole childhood, like starting when I was like 11. And that's not normal. And to the point that I went to ERs multiple times. I had every test done possible.
Okay.
And the day that I got on anxiety meds, it went away because it was all caused by anxiety. So there's so many things that just started to fall into place. But I was misdiagnosed as an adult with narcolepsy. And I actually diagnosed myself on TikTok.
Oh, really?
Watching creators like ADHD Love and other creators that just illustrate what the experience of ADHD is like. And being able to see that and be like, wait a second, I do every single thing that they just said. And like going through everything they've ever posted and seeing just how much things fit together. And it all just fell into place and it all just made sense. And so it wasn't even something that I was told, it was something that I was basically told myself, which then I felt again like, okay, well, now I'm just grasping at straws again. But when I talked to a doctor and figured out it was right, it was a really interesting moment because my whole life made sense. And I finally realized why I was a hypochondriac growing up and why I was always desperate to be diagnosed with something. It wasn't that I wanted to be sick, it was that I knew I was. And I just wanted to know why. Because if you could put a name to it, you can fight it or you can treat it, and you can deal with it. But I didn't have a name for it, so I didn't know how to deal with it.
And it was confusing because people were pulling you from one direction to another, telling you A, B, and C when it was something completely different. So that was a difficulty when you was growing up, because not only did you have these feelings, you couldn't quite understand what they were, but you were being told what they were when they weren't. So that confused you even more, and that must have been really, really hard for you as you was growing up, really twisting things in your head. And
and it probably is the reason it took me so long to get on anxiety and depression meds, because in my head I'm like, well, you're just making it up because that's what I was told. So it definitely had an impact. But once I was able to figure it out and really come to terms with things, everything started to make sense. But just looking back at all of the misdiagnoses I had, and there were times where I would go to the doctor just because I couldn't stay awake, and they were like, well, there's nothing we can do. Or they put me on, I was getting migraines that were connected to something else, and they put me on blood pressure meds that almost killed me. Like all of these things that I'm like, you guys are making me worse. I know something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but you're wrong and I'm getting worse. So it was it wasn't fun, but finally figuring it out was just a really just freeing feeling.
Okay, so taking all that into account, we've spoken about how people told you something completely different. It was very confusing for you, very difficult for you. Why do you find it so difficult to forgive yourself, considering that it was you that was being pulled left and right as a little tiny child all the way through? What is so hard to forgive yourself for? I'm sitting on the fence. I'm not judging, but I'm just asking, after talking about everything, and you trying to work yourself out, but people that you trusted, and they're not to blame, maybe they thought rightly or wrongly, whatever the situation is, but you were being advised and being told this, that, and the other, which you then found out later on. Why do you find it so difficult to forgive yourself now, knowing that you were advised wrongly in so many different ways?
Part of it is probably because I'm still kind of in the similar position. Like I'm still, I don't want to sound like I'm like a victim of my own brain, but some of the traits that I know are connected, I still can't pick them. Like I'm still masking in ways that I don't want to be, and in situations where like I wish I could just be myself, and I'm not. I don't know what that means because of I've spent so long not being myself. So I think until I can actually stop doing the things that I hated, it'll be hard for me to like move past it just because it's still there.
Well, just remember that it took you so long to be in a position you had to mask, or you felt you had to mask because of what you went through. It's not going to be, especially now you've just recently found out about yourself, found out more about yourself. Sometimes it doesn't work overnight. It takes time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just give yourself some slack to say to yourself, all right, I had to go through that. It took me so many years, especially when I was young. I need some space to be able to let go of the mask, and to let go. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And while I'm not at the point necessarily that it's like I have fully like forgiven it and all of that, I'm definitely at a point where I'm kinder to myself about it.
Good.
And like it used to be like, wow, I'm so lazy, and like just like, why can't I just get up and clean my room? And now it's like, okay, well, I have executive dysfunction. That's why I can't get up and do this. Yeah. And now instead of just letting that happen, I find coping mechanisms like the body doubling, and I did get on medication that I take when I need it and stuff. So I'm finding ways to move past it, but it's a lifelong journey. It changes every day, and I'm just finding ways to just be kinder to myself despite it.
Okay, so now we've talked a bit about the psyche and how you grew up and everything else. You decided you fell into this whole business of doing podcasting. You're bringing a bit of your life experience with you because you can be quite spontaneous. Even though inside you're a bit nervous about certain things, you just take the bull by the horn and you just go for it, right?
Yeah.
So I suppose you get a lot of clients that have issues, that are very nervous, that think they can't do this, they can't do that. I've been one of them, listeners. I put up my hands.
Yeah.
So you know how they feel, you feel them, and then you obviously put their mind to rest. And how do you do that? Because you get a lot of people that are very nervous when it comes to being the face of their whole brand. That can't be easy for them.
Yeah, it's definitely a struggle that a lot of people have, and I attribute a lot of that to imposter syndrome. And just this feeling that you don't deserve to be in the place that you are in. And that has been something that I've had to work with a lot of people on moving past, and it's something that I have to work on moving past. And I don't have a concrete answer on how to do that because I haven't done it yet, but it's something that we're always working on. But I've also found something that really helps, because when I'm talking to people, it's to help them with something like public speaking, podcasting, thought leadership. And I found that a lot of the fear behind it comes from like their fear of they're going to mess up, or they're going to say something wrong. They're not going to be prepared. And that's part of the reason that I focus so much on storytelling. Because if you're telling your story, you can't mess up. You're speaking from experience. You're not speaking from memory. You're not giving stats and facts and figures that you've memorized. You're just talking about what happened. And not only is that something that you can't mess up, but it's also, we're all afraid of being judged. We're all afraid of what the online trolls are going to say and how they're like, people are going to say that we're wrong and they're going to try to disprove us. They can disprove facts and figures. They can't disprove your story.
Yeah, but I take it it's really difficult for them still because they're seeing it from the point of view. When you talk about your story, you're also afraid to be judged because it is your story. So I take it you have clients that have this feeling of being judged because now we're talking about your story. How do you get around that situation when they have that kind of issue when they want to perform?
Yeah, I mean, for some, it's just kind of a baby steps kind of process. And when I talk about storytelling, and especially like personal storytelling, there's, for some reason, this predetermined idea that I'm talking about trauma. And I'm talking about the stories that are dramatic, traumatic, sensational, like the childhood stories. And I'm not. Storytelling is simple. It can be as simple as we want it to be. And the stories that we tell can be personal without being personal. So you can, if they're nervous about being judged and they don't want to talk too much about themselves, that's when we start with case studies. We start with stories of that happen strictly within your career instead of talking about your personal life. And that's often easier because if they're telling a story, for the most part, it's a success story. So it's not necessarily putting yourself in the position to be judged because what you did was good and it ended like it has a happy ending. And of course, there are exceptions and there are types of stories that I teach about telling that don't necessarily have those happy endings, and those have their place as well. But when you're sharing your successes and you're sharing your wins, there's less to judge. And then you don't have to go into the personal pieces that will make you feel that vulnerability.
Wonderful. So with your experience that you've used in the past and the situation you're still going through because you're dealing with your own demons, you're helping your clients navigate those demons at the same time. And that's why you're successful in what you're doing, because you're taking your experience with the business, and hence why your clients are all cool and going in the right direction, and you make them feel, like they feel safe, or safer, should I say.
I try. I mean, like I said, I wrote a book on how to tell stories and why you need to use stories for teaching the concepts that you're trying to teach as a thought leader. But I wrote it through my own stories. So it's basically a memoir. So I'm doing the things that I'm telling other people to do. So I know how hard it is. But I still, if I'm going to tell you to do this, I can't not do it myself. I can't be a hypocrite.
Yeah, totally.
So it was actually a really almost cathartic experience to write the book, just to put those stories down. And it was kind of profound. And I'm like, I don't care if nobody reads it, because writing it was worth it.
Good for you. Right. So how can people get in touch with you when it comes to your business? To get
Yes. My website is favoritedaughtermedia.com. And you'll find all of my socials there, my contact info, anything you could possibly want.
And as you can hear, listeners, she helps people build a podcast, gain experience, and everything you can see with her journey. You can see why this is the case. It can be daunting doing your own podcast, being in front of other people, and don't I know it? And when I started the podcast, I was shaking in my boots for sure. But I was glad I did what I did, and I seem to have a gift for it. And if you don't take the plunge, you will never know. Just like Sara, You know, when she hits a situation, she knows how anxious she can get. She leaves herself so much time, because if she leaves it any later, it's not going to happen. Maybe you should do the same thing. Give yourself a time frame, just do it, see what happens. Maybe get in touch with Sara, because she seems like the woman for you if that's the kind of service that you need. Sara, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so, you know, listeners, you'll have all the details down below. You'll be able to see in the footnotes, and you can click copy and paste away to be able to get through to her and chat away. In the meantime, sayonara.